All right. Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to the Healing Brothers podcast with Sam Simmons and myself, Brandon Jones. And today we have a good topic that's been on the forefront of many people's minds all week. Are the events that went down on January 6th at our nation's capital. We had folks storm the Capitol, and it set off some events that we haven't seen in this country, and it set off a lot of emotional responses from many people who have viewed it. How you doing, Sam?
I'm good. I'm at home. Shoot, as long as I'm at home, I'm good. Because it can be scary out there right now. So I'm good. Uh, yeah. And as usual, I want to acknowledge our folks in the community who are struggling with issues around COVID, and give my condolences to all who have been stricken and succumbed to COVID in our community, since it's we've been hit so hard. But going forward, a lot of stuff happening in this past week. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, let's go on the good note first. The good note is we got the two senatorships in Georgia, and they're Georgia's first Jewish and African American senators. It's interesting that runoff option was a setup to try to keep black folks out of office down in Georgia. And so what the deal was with the runoff, the logic behind it is if you didn't get more than 50% and you got like three different people, right? And you have the runoff, and you know that the other two most likely would have been white, then you have then you have both sides, right, of those voters end up being outvoting the black candidate, and didn't work this time. Shoot, there was people in the community who didn't even vote for the during the presidential election, who voted this time around. They're like, we know this stuff is serious. And then another about 10-15% of Republicans in the outer areas, there were less, but went down about 10-15%. And some people are blaming that on all the rhetoric about the election was rigged and that kind of thing. But nevertheless, we got the two senators out of Georgia, and it's all good. That's the good out of the week. And then starting with some of the stuff that early in the week that was kind of on the funky side is the police officer in Wisconsin got off for shooting Mr. Blake in the back. We had that go as well. And, and then, then we had the riot on the Capitol. You got any thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, it was crazy. I didn't realize. I've been hearing about January 6th for like the last 2 weeks, just in the circles that I frequent,
right,
on YouTube and folks and things like that. So I knew that there were going to be people showing up there. I didn't realize the extent of how everything was going to end up going. And then I was busy on the 6th, so I didn't really get to see anything. And then I was actually on a virtual meeting, and someone said, they burst out. It was like, oh shit, something's going down at the Capitol. And then they flashed their phone into their camera so we could kind of see what was happening. And that kind of sucked the wind out the meeting. We had to kind of just shut it down at that point because we were like, oh, what's going on? And yeah, man, I mean, my biggest thing is I'm not surprised. I say that all the time. Like, this is what people do. This is human behavior. When people have disagreements and they can get charged up and they feel connected to a leader that can dog whistle and get people motivated to do things, you will see stuff that you never seen before. I think it's unfortunate that we had some people lose their lives during that event. I think that I think that the hypocrisy of this country definitely shows based on who was there protesting and how they were able to do the things they've done. I've heard all types of stuff since that it was an attempted coup, and it was a conspiracy, and these are crisis actors. I done heard it all since then, but I think that these were just white folks who were in a position where they got charged up, the battery got put in their back, and they did what they typically do. They go ahead and they invade, colonize things. This is what folks do, and that's what happened. Whether they and that was their expression of how they need to have their voices heard. And I've heard a lot of folks say if those was black people at the Capitol, we wouldn't have got that far. And I tend to agree with that notion. We wouldn't have got that far. But in a comparison to a lot of the other protesting and things that we've seen, I'm not surprised that people were able to go as far as they went.
Yeah, well, the thing is it's one of them things when you ain't afraid of the so-called enemy, you do whatever you want, right?
Right.
And then we're finding out that amongst that crowd were police officers from different states, sheriffs from different states. They even had I think a city, not a congressman or whatever from Virginia or one of them states that was there who just resigned.
Yep.
That when you in that privileged position, it covers all the way around. And there's some suspicions, it hasn't been verified, that there was some of the folks on the Capitol Police that were, at least, well, if not a part of it, was agreeable, right? They felt the same way, right?
Yeah.
Some of the videos look like they just opened up the barricades and let them in. They got some pictures I've seen where they were taking selfies with the rioters. That you really believe you can do whatever you want when you go home and put all this stuff on Facebook and think nothing gonna happen. Why would you think nothing gonna happen when they just let you walk on out? When they come in and take the building, they just let you walk on out and say, no, get out of here, go home, right? And why would you think any other way? And then in talking to some of the folks who have set up protests in DC for like Black Lives Matter, they had talked about the list of things and permits they had to have to even have their protests, the agreements they had to make with the different police departments, right? And they also had to have insurance. Now I wonder if these folks had any insurance. I wonder what policy got the payoff on this one.
Right.
The question is, did they even have insurance? Right. I would say I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. Right. And in doing my other show, there's some white individuals who are like, why are you black folks so upset? Right? It's like, what do you mean? Why are we so upset? We know how this disparity go in terms of how we're treated, right? The issue is the blatancy of this situation and the fact that you got people in power in these different departments, police departments, federal departments, and all like this, who said, oh, we didn't know what was going to happen. Well, you know what? Stevie Wonder reads Braille, right? I mean, Def Diamond Blood knew that this stuff was going to go down. One of my white colleagues said, I bet you they're gonna riot. He calls me up. I told you. It's like, but you didn't know nothing about. You didn't believe that this was going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like how how much privilege do you have? And the ironic part that people, now you got people, white individuals say, they're screaming and hollering, this if this was black folks, blah blah blah. But there was a quote from one of the people, one of the rioters, and this is her quote. This is America.
Mm-hmm.
And
Full display.
yeah, this is America. They shouldn't be. They're shooting at us.
Mm.
They supposed to shoot at BLM, but they're shooting at patriots.
Mm.
And then her husband responds, "Don't worry, honey. We showed them today. We showed them what we're really all about."
Mm.
They're supposed to shoot BLM,
Not us.
not us. We're patriots. We're patriots.
Mm. And again, the hypocrisy, the dichotomy of BL, which is funny because Black Lives Matter has become kind of like this tag name for non-white people, and patriots is like, this is what white people are, as if we don't have black patriots. It's like, this stuff is crazy, man.
Oh well, how patriotic you have to be to fight in every war in America,
right?
In a country that you were enslaved in,
right?
And in some cases, after you fight in the war, like after World War One, the year 1919, you had riots in 28 different. They call it the bloody year or whatever. In 28 different cities that they note, where you had riots of whites who literally hung black men in their uniform, and not only black men, Native men, Latina men in their uniforms, and told black men, "Don't you wear your uniform in public because you still a nigga."
Right. Yep.
And we constantly still show up. And if you can't think about, again, as I said in the past, when people have issues with Black Lives Matter, the question is, why do a group of people have to remind other people that their lives matter? What in the world is going on that they have to feel the necessity to say that, right? And so, yeah, it's like, again, like you said, I wasn't surprised. I think the surprising part is how unprepared they were. They like showing the video where the brother is running up the steps when they're chasing the brother. They like showing that one. And then what? All of the head people from the Capitol Police, from different police departments, all resign. So, and now, they're talking about impeaching Trump again, and asking him to resign. And you got a few scary Republicans who then all of a sudden, yeah, he needs to resign, but why bother with impeachment? And that's a whole nother weird question in itself. But just before they all headed down to the Capitol, him and his little cronies was geeking them all up.
Hey.
So I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how we continue to move forward in this country. I think one of my fears is that once Trump is officially out of the office and Biden gets in, that a lot of black folks are not going to be as politically focused as we should be, because we feel like, oh, the Democrats are in, we're going to be good. And I think that's not the energy. We need to keep the same energy, no matter if it's Trump or Biden, whoever, and continue to be mobilizing in a political way.
Well, and the thing is I probably am a little bit more hopeful because of some of the things I'm hearing. people realize that just because the Democrats have taken over, I had somebody who said to me this recently, once we get to the other side of this, all bets is off. That Democrats just can't take us for granted any longer, right? And you already got Biden talking about, well, we want to do some of that kumbaya stuff with folks who basically members of that group who ransacked the Capitol. We all kumbaya. What does that mean? What is that code for? Right? We're still talking about an elderly white man who always been into making friends with folks, and not the and I'm and I don't even we're talking about folks, the old Southern crew. We're still talking about one of the things I've learned about some old people, and I'm old too, that they kind of stuck in their ways. That kumbaya. We know if you look out throughout history, anytime we get a compromise between Democrats and Republicans, black folks end up being the gum on the shoe, right? I mean, if we look at Reconstruction was a compromise.
Right. To help this country move forward, which
right.
we talked about enough.
The ending of Reconstruction was a compromise. Because during that election, it was really close, and the members of both parties got together behind closed doors and said, "Okay, we'll let you have the presidency long as you agree to end Reconstruction." Compromise. Black folks on the gum on the bottom of the shoe, right? We even look at when we talk about the Clinton drug policy. Every now and then people will say, there was civil rights leaders who were concerned about what was going on with crack and other drugs in the community, right? And right. And they say that, but they don't say the whole information. Is those folks didn't just want law enforcement; they wanted some drug treatment. They wanted some investment in the community, because we know around that time, investment in the inner city was real low ever since the 70s. Right. And so nobody talks about the other policies that was asked for by the community. Because it's often said the black community is not about, we don't want to have safety and might not want to have totally without police and that kind of stuff. We want to be treated like everybody else.
Right.
So what did we get? We got jail and military police.
Right.
So when I think about compromise, when we're talking about the mainstream compromise, we always, if nothing else, whatever pertains to us and might benefit our community, a lot of times will be the first thing that gets compromised out. Right.
Right.
Even around the welfare and that kind of stuff, one of the other suggestions was job programs for black men, because unemployment was high during the early 60s and late 50s, right? But what did we get? We got welfare. Mm-hmm. Welfare that did not promote family.
Right.
Because, the good old boys like, we ain't going to give no money to nobody that got some man in the house. But again, they're compromised. What did we get? Right? So, we need to continue push, this whole thing. We need to come kumbaya. We need to come together. Okay, fine. But the thing is we as people of color put this thing over the hump, at least, and we're going to see what the compromise going to look like. Right. We
Right.
we didn't push as much as we needed to, because we knew that Obama was going to have a hard time, and we didn't want to be part of that hard time. Well, that's up, right? And we want Kamala to be successful. At least majority of us do, because there's some folks in the community that are just off the chain when it comes to her, and which is, I find problems with. But the thing is we need to put the energy down even more, because we with over these 4 years, people of color and black folks in particular have paid a big price.
Right.
And then we throw this COVID thing in the middle. We still paying a big price, and then the other thing I think within the community, we really, really, really need to come together and address some misinformation that we have within our community around COVID, vaccines and all. I'm not saying that I want to push one view or the other, but there's some really crazy views going on in our own community that is very destructive to the community. And the sad part about it, is all you need is a little piece of truth. If you get a little piece of truth, you can blow up a conspiracy, right? And when you've been in a society that have lied so much and have been so doggone sneaky, it's hard to get people to believe that they mean well. And I understand that. That's the price you get when it's like they always talk about the person who lies all the time, and then when he tells the truth, nobody believes him. I mean, that's the price we pay in America for this, especially within our community, and so that's going to take a lot of work as well, right? And so which brings us up to this ideal I think about is this compassion and accountability. And the compassion accountability is this ideal that I talk about, especially when I'm being confronted by some white colleagues about, but what about holding people accountable? But what about holding people accountable, especially when I'm dealing with corrections or I'm dealing with child protection? They're all gun-ho in terms of holding people accountable. But it's always interesting how that holding people accountable gets to be shaded by race and color, right?
Right.
Even when we looked at the numbers around drug policy, holding people accountable, folks using drugs at the same level and in certain drugs at a higher level, but one goes to jail and the other one goes to treatment, or one gets a ticket and the other one goes to juvie. And so when we're talking about compassion and accountability, I believe in accountability, because there's got to be accountability. Because if there's no accountability, you end up with chaos. And when you ain't holding one whole group of people accountable, what do we get? We got some chaos, right? But if you got compassion without accountability, you got chaos. And when you're dealing with fairly dealing with people, if you don't believe that if everybody deserves compassion, then that's a problem. And then you end up with these unfair situations, right? And when we deal with clients, when we deal within the neighborhood, when we deal in policy, believe no matter how you feel about somebody, if you show people compassion in an equal way, even accountability works out better.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times when it comes to making changes from a policy standpoint, there's no compassion being considered in many of the things that get passed and pushed through. And the folks that end up getting hurt the most, a lot of times they're not even at the tables to do anything about it. And sometimes we don't even know what's happening. So it's hard to have compassion for someone when they're not visible or their voice is not present. That's why I've been pushing this concept and idea that we have to be a lot more engaged when it comes, especially to local politics, those things that directly impact your life on a day to day. We have to be at them tables. We have to have our voice heard and have our strategies put in place, and not just expect because somebody represents a political party that party's going to take care of us, because it hasn't proven to be correct thus far.
Yes, yes. So, um,
That's not how politics works. From what I've seen, it don't work like that. Like if you want something done and you're able to get a political leader or a lobbyist or whoever to champion that cause, that's what that person or those people are going to do. But if you're just gonna leave it in the hands of somebody because they represent a party that you feel comfortable with, that's not ain't nothing gonna get done that way, because that's not how politics work. There's a reason why when bills get passed, several things are in that bill. There's a lot of negotiations that take place. There's a lot of favors and IOUs and all types of stuff like that. And I don't think a lot of black folks know that. And that's what we continue to get the political short end of the stick, because we're not championing folks. And when you have those city council people who are asking for your votes and they want to know what you want and you just can't tell them, they're going to do what the other people who do know what they want and are going to help push and give them the votes that they need. And I think we just need to, as we move forward, we have to play this political game a lot better.
yeah, and the thing is we can't just say black folks don't know. A lot of folks don't know, right? That's the sad part. A lot of
Sure.
even those folks who ran up into the Capitol don't know, right? so
I would agree with that.
and the thing about America, sometimes I don't think they want no, but they don't want people to know. See, if we keep this, see, the thing is what Trump did. It's okay to have a little chaos, right? Because if you keep a little chaos, you keep people at bay, you keep people at each other's throats, and that kind of thing, right? A little chaos, we keep everybody kind of on the ignorant side, then you allow poor people to blame people of color, black people in particular, for their situation, and then I can do whatever I want to them too, right? And then geek them up at the same time about we for you and they ain't for you, and it was always that way on both sides, right? Because we can be honest that there's some shady stuff that has been done in our community from the Democratic side as well. But the issue is Trump, who's not really who's not loyal to nothing, right? But Trump and barely his children. Okay, he took all of the little shady stuff that was being done at different, with different presidents at different times, put it all under one roof, and took the big one, race and oppression, and ran with it, right? And they didn't expect this stuff to blow up like this. And that's what tickles me to death is all of these folks talking about, well, we want him to resign, and we don't, or we're going to resign from the White House or whatever. Or I didn't think it was going to get out. But what? In November, these same people did not recognize Biden as being the president-elect, which would have been a long way to stop some of this bull crap. Right now, you want to sit up. Well, that let the past be the past. Oh, let the past be the past, right? And we know that's the way the history round is built in America. Let the past be the past. Yeah, we enslaved people and all that, but let the past be the past. We're, and so he is the spark of something that was already there, was already underlined.
Yeah.
Right? And so, you know, he just did it better than everybody. As long as you keep a little chaos and keep people to be suspicious of each other, people in power can continue to be in power, do whatever they want, right? But he took it to a whole nother level because he didn't
Didn't care.
give a damn about the rules. There ain't no rules. There ain't never been no rules. He done broke every rule under the sun before he even got in the White House. He
Mm.
one of the few people who borrowed so much money from the banks on the okie doke
Mm-hmm.
that when he went broke, he owed them so much they had to borrow him more money.
Mm.
He done played how to play broke and be a millionaire. Yeah, I guess that would be a good story. How to play broke and be a millionaire.
Mm.
You know, so ugh, it's so frustrating. So frustrating.
Yeah, I think one of the points that you just made that's important is that, you know, these folks who support the folks who stormed the Capitol, the folks that were there, it's not like these folks were just created back in 2016 when Trump got elected. These folks have been here for a long time. I mean, this stuff goes back, and most people just don't pay attention to this stuff. Like this goes back. One book that comes to mind, and I know people don't read enough, but there's a book called The Turner Diaries. You ever heard of the Turner Diaries?
No, that's one I
All right.
haven't heard.
So the Turner Diaries is this book. It's actually a fiction book, but it was really like a manifesto for these folks who are pretty much like the "don't tread on me" type of people. Like they are patriots. They want small government. They want to make sure that things work in their favor. Government does not interfere with their lifestyles, and does not impede on their freedoms. And there's this book called The Turner Diaries, and then the Turner Diaries is like this story that ultimately becomes this manifesto on how to maintain your freedom. And in this book, they actually I don't want to say they predict, because this person uh so they talk about the Oklahoma City bombing in this book, and this book was written in like I think in the 70s, and Oklahoma City bombing happened in the 90s. So people are saying that this book could have been what led to the Oklahoma City bombings, because that was talked about in the actual book. So these folks have been here. I mean, this is where you get those folks who are talking about, 1776 and, don't tread on me. Like that Trump was just a president. I don't want to say a candidate. He was a president that spoke that language and galvanized these people to a level that they have not been galvanized to. And these people are not going anywhere. That's the thing that we got to keep in mind, is they ain't going anywhere. And they're going to continue to move on no matter who's in the White House. And again, I'm not surprised that we've seen this, because this stuff has been bubbling up for the last 4 years.
And the thing is, well, even longer than that. But the thing is he gave it life. Okay,
Yeah.
he gave it life. Do you understand that the men who bum rushed the Michigan State House, their
Oh yeah.
organization, the bomber of Oklahoma was a member of their organization.
Yeah. The stuff.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they did. So in what we're hearing, at least from some of the FBI experts, there is no legislation to deal with domestic terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You cannot address that domestic terrorism until after the bomb.
Right.
It's like they can have all the information in the world, but they and again, why is that? Right? That's that back to our freedoms kind of deal.
Right. So, what about the Southern Poverty Law Center?
What about it?
Isn't that organization around stopping domestic terrorists and hate groups?
Yeah, but the issue comes down to is how do you try them for terrorism when there is nothing on the books to do that?
Law wise, right?
You're right. And because there's nothing on the books, that means that technically, legally, you cannot infiltrate them until after they commit a crime.
Right.
So So the thing is another one of those things that protects this group of people, or this kind of supremacist institution, right? Because domestic terrorism is not new in America at all, and especially for black folks.
Right.
That domestic terrorism is what chased black folks up out of down south.
Correct. Correct. And if we want to, and to a certain extent, we could just say it's almost, wiped out the whole indigenous population at this point.
Right.
There ain't as many indigenous folks as we've seen. I think that's an act of domestic terrorism as well. And and this is not the first time we've seen Americans storm Capitol buildings or these political spaces. I don't know if folks are familiar with the Weather Underground, but that was a group of folks who did this back in the 70s as well. It was the 70s was an interesting decade. I don't think we paid enough attention to the 70s, but we had these college educated youth out of the University of Michigan and other universities who organized, called themselves the Weather Underground, and were bombing buildings and threatening politicians and all types of stuff. But we don't hear about that. We'll hear about the Black Panther Party all day and things they did, but the Weather Underground was really with it. They was about it. They was doing they was making this stuff happen for years. And the folks that were a part of that, these folks till this day are still alive. They're not in jail. I think two of them are actual professors. Somebody else I think does things in film. It's crazy. That I don't think people even know about this stuff.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up the Black Panthers. They always want to bring them up, and I don't remember them. Do you remember them setting off any bombs?
No, they didn't bomb anything. Optically, they scared people. They stood their ground. But the optics of seeing black men stand up for themselves and be armed and be organized was terrifying.
Well, that's that whole thing about know your place, right? That's that whole thing, do what I say. It's like, Mr. Blake, well, he didn't follow directions. So, once you don't follow directions, that's that whole slave quarter stuff. You don't follow that. You too uppity to follow directions. When I say so, that gives me the right to do whatever I need to do to you, right? That whole uppity, and I've talked about that before, about when you look at the stories behind many of the lynchings that we have on record. A good portion of them are individuals who were lynched because they did not bow down to the crowd.
Right.
They had the audacity to hold their head up, do well financially, do well business-wise, and say no.
Right.
So, it's like, why is black folks concerned and upset about this? Because it's so blatant. It's so blatant. And ironically, things got to be so dramatically done that some of our white counterparts to believe us, right? Like with Mr. Floyd. And with this, oh God, you're right. There's a double standard. It's like, even Biden had to say that, right?
Yeah.
So it's frustrating. Right. So what the difficulty is, we have that battle, but at the same time, we still have the internal battle as a result of the external battle that we fight in the community itself.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's the battle where I spend the most of my energy, is helping us figure out how we get our own internal stuff together. Now we can't ignore what's happening outside of the community because it bleeds in and still impacts us. But we can't sit by idly as well and just let these things happen. We have to take matters into our own hands as a community and get our community in a better position.
And and some people say, why you always want to hold us accountable? What about them? What do you mean? What about them? What that got to do with the price of apples? Well, white folks do it. It's like we're not talking about white folks. We already you agree that there's different rules for white folks than us, but that does not have nothing to do with what we're doing in the community internally. That doesn't have anything to do with the fact that we got leadership in our community taking advantage of the women in our community.
Mm. Mm.
We what do we do about that, right? People that we have grown to trust in our community, or even worse, having folks in our community, right, and who's part of our leadership, and when they get busted, right, when
Mm-hmm.
they get busted, everybody says, "I'm not surprised." That's a shame in itself. How you gonna sit there and talk about I'm not surprised
Right. Right.
by the behavior? And so if you're not surprised, that means that you wasn't doing anything to go there. And I guess I'm just as much as fault as anybody else.
Mm.
Because I wasn't surprised. And then the ideal. I was talking to a person who does domestic violence work, and we were talking about a incident that has occurred, and she works with victims, female victims, right? And she was saying, she says, the women that the leader took advantage of, because there's some folks that worked for the leader, right? That he took advantage of, females,
Mm.
that they didn't even, in some ways, they didn't even know they were being victimized.
Interesting. This is locally.
Yeah.
Okay.
They didn't even know they were being victimized. Now think about that. See,
Stockholm.
that go back to,
Stockholm syndrome.
yeah. Well, we could call it Stockholm syndrome, and if we want to call it Stockholm syndrome, our whole community suffers from Stockholm syndrome.
Damn. Oh man. I mean, that's one way to look at it for sure.
I mean, the way we won't address our humanity, we're traumatized by the system that we are involved with, that that has this kind of, and I hate to use the word love hate, because relationship with, and won't address how that traumatic experience that's continuing affects the trauma we perpetrate on each other within the community, to the point that when you are being traumatized, you don't even know it's being traumatized. It's like, this is just the way it is. How do you do that? I mean, and you see it all the time. This is what you do, so you can maintain, or I needed the job and that kind of stuff. And again, I've ran into that and dealing with victims a lot. That's why when I deal with systems around things like family violence, domestic violence, and I'm dealing with my white counterparts who always want to lock everybody up, right? Because we done proved that locking folks up don't make a community better. Because if locking folks up, our community should be the shining star, right? That's where that compassion, accountability come in.
Right.
Because if I feel what is going on, both as a victim and a perpetrator, is normal, how do you punish me for something that's normal? This is what we do. This is how we do it. And I've had clients say that, well, Mr. Sim was the big deal. Everybody does it. And so um, I'm supposed to, I've been victimized, so I'm supposed to care more than the next person. And it ain't, and it's not just a male thing, male female thing, right? I mean, we got young people beating old people in the head. And not only do you shoot a person, you pistol whip them at the same time, take their money. How much pain, people, well, that's a monster. Well, even a monster was a human being.
Right.
And if you want to see, we like calling people names when we don't want to deal with issues, right? If you call them a name, then you can discount them. Well, that's a monster.
Yeah.
Oh no, well,
Objectify 'em.
yeah, that's a monster. So that's for the end of the comment. How did we end up with a monster? How did we end up with a young monster? Right? Because again, the Hunchback of Notre Dame was what? A human being. So how do it? Because if you understand how do we get the monster, we might do a better job of not creating more monsters. And that's the most compassionate thing we could do.
Right. And I think we also have to mention, if we're going to use the term monster or predators or whatever term they're labeling us these days, that if we continue to not do something about it and reduce, our young people, because it's majority young people who are involved in these activities, we also have to understand that involvement keeps parts of this system moving forward.
Right.
Without that level of dysfunction, parts of this country will shut down. And we have to understand there's been industry built around our dysfunction. And that's a huge thing that we have to be mindful of, is we really need to we have folks who prey upon our dysfunction. And in order to stop being victimized from that, we have to change the way that our culture develops and continues to develop.
Yeah. But again, it still comes down to the fact that if you don't recognize things as dysfunction as a community, how do you address it? And not, when things have become to be, that's just the way it is, right?
The norm.
And not really connecting the dots backwards in terms of that. It just ends up being a compound problem that we end up with. So I don't know. I done said I don't know twice.
I think 2021's got you speechless.
Hey,
slowing down on us, man. What's going on?
Hey, man. Maybe my age is catching up with me. It's like it maybe it's done beat me down. I don't know, but I know that 2021 is going to be a challenge for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
Right. But it's going and I'm compared. I care about everybody, but I'm unapologetically focused on the Black community. Right. And we unfortunately been catching hell so long, we know how to catch hell.
Right.
We've been catching hell so long, we know how to catch hell.
Mm-hmm. And we expect it. We expect hell to be caught. That's the scary part for me from a psychological standpoint, is that the expectation that hell is supposed to be a part of our lives. But I don't think we understand how that sets us up to take on so much trauma and pain, because it's just normalized. I feel like our filter for pain, or our tolerance level for pain, is a lot wider than other folks. That it's just we feel like we just expect it. It's an expectation. That's a dangerous way to live.
Yeah, and the thing is ironically, physically, we'll come out of this, right? is at how will we come out of it emotionally, and how do our community come out of it collectively, right? Is the bigger piece for me, because there's some of us who done figured it out, right? And it's a tough lesson to learn. Um, that you might have to do something that is considered not black.
To heal. Ain't
Yeah,
that a shame,
yeah, yeah.
man?
It's like like set limits, learn how to forgive within the community. You know, uh, uh, be an example all the time to our young people, right? Uh, quit blaming our young people for their craziness. That don't mean you don't hold them accountable, but young people don't are not born with all this craziness that they're experiencing and doing. So
Right.
and so if you start from that premise, we're already failed. We're already failed. You know, because everybody gets tired of being the victim over time, right?
Mm.
And one of the things, especially I used to say with males, but I'm seeing it with females. It's always better to be the perpetrator than the victim,
Mm.
even though emotionally it don't feel much better. That's what's so bad about it.
Mm.
It's temporary, right? Because a little bit of the humanity that we have left in us will make us feel some kind of way, unless we medicate ourselves at a level.
Right.
So so the structure is, and one of the things I'm trying to play with the theme for our conference this year, which that's been hard. But one of the themes I'm looking at is the cycle of violence of blackness.
Break that down a little bit.
Well, we've been in this cycle of violence almost ever since we've been brought here, right? And so we're not blaming black folks for the cycle of violence. It's the being in the middle of that cycle of violence. How do we break out of that, right? How do we address that cycle of violence? And if you look at a cycle of violence wheel, you got these honeymoon stages, and then we slowly get into this kind of leading up. The relationship is always tenuous, right? Then you have these explosions, right? And this big fight or a big argument, and then after the argument, the perpetrator says, I love you. I love you. You see what you made me do. And you see that with black people, you see what we had to do, right? And we end up in this cycle and we get hoodwinked, right? And so how do we break that cycle and recovery? That's another theme that people in the committees talking about. But recovery from what? Right? Well, we could say recovery from the cycle. But when you look up the word recovery, it says go back to. So what do we go back to?
Mm.
And maybe we need to, and see, I'm a firm believer, we need to define stuff for ourselves and maybe even break from the definitions that has been given to us, right? Because I believe that when we talk about our recovery is based on our creativity. So our creativity to build something to go back to or go from. But we love using that word recovery, right? But again, if you look it up, and I know, being that I'm a licensed chemical dependency counselor, I know what people mean. But if you really look up the definition, it talks about go back to. And what does that mean for black people? So what are your thoughts about that? We got a few minutes.
Yeah, I think we need to let go of trying to return back to something because we're in a different space and time and society and environment. I think we need to move forward. I think we need to deal with, understand our past. I'm not saying we don't need to understand it, but understand it, but focus on where we're at now and evolve. One thing that you said years ago to me, and it always stood out, you said we black folks have learned how to exist. We've learned how to quote unquote not even really survive very well, but survival. We've just learned to be, but we haven't learned how to evolve. And
Right.
that's what I'm on. I'm we need to look at what's happened. We need to understand things. It's kind of like the principle of Sankofa. You look back to move forward, but I think we shouldn't stay looking back. I think that's where we got caught. We like to romanticize our history, and make up stuff to make ourselves feel good and build self-esteem without understanding that we have so much genius and greatness present day that we should be able to be a lot farther than we are as a group collectively. Now, we see parts of our genius shine on an individual level. You'll see people who do things individually, but collectively, we've not moved pretty far at all. I mean, if you look at statistics, whether they're talking about education, economics, whatever, you can just break it down. We haven't really moved very far as a collective group from where we started once slavery ended. And in
But
some areas, we've gotten worse.
but what if you know what people often will say? But the system is unfair, and of course we didn't get that far. How do you deal with that? Because I get confronted with that all the time.
At some point in time, we have to understand that the system is what it is. And if we keep playing the system's game and allowing ourselves to fall through the traps of the system, we'll continue to get stuck. Until we get involved in the system, either try to revolutionize it or destroy it, what's the point? So for folks who are saying that, why are you here? Move to a different country.
Right.
If this system don't work for you, go somewhere else, find a different one. Because to be honest with you, this is one of the better systems that's out there. That's the crazy thing that people don't want to hear. But go live in a different culture and see how that works. For some folks it does, and for some it doesn't. But here in the United States, as bad as it is better than plenty of other countries out there.
And the thing is I think folks realize that. That's why you're seeing a lot of young people doing, it's like, we're going to do our thing, but we're not going to let you off the hook.
Right.
Right.
And both things can be happening at the same time.
Right. And that's the thing, is because I never, ever will argue with somebody who says that the system is rigged. Right. Because when I start talking about how do we work, how do we heal from, and we'll do the simple recovery. How do we heal from the trauma? Right. How do we, again, you say don't look back. And some people think when you're talking about trauma, you're looking back. No, I'm looking at recognizing the scars of the trauma, right?
Right.
Not ignoring the scars so that they heal better, right? So if you got these scars and you still acting out because of the scars, now you're causing other scars for other people.
Right.
And so so again, I think we have the opportunity to recreate the world that we want to be. And what's so ironic about that, as Black people, if we did that, everybody gonna want to follow us.
Yeah.
Right. And not only are they gonna want to follow us, they're gonna want to take credit for it, like they do everything else.
Sure.
Right. And we can't worry about that because it's got to be about us, right? Yeah. And take and understanding the system that we got, learning about it as best you can, manipulate that bad boy, go around that bad boy, because a lot of the folks who are running these systems are dumber than two doornails. And people in power play on that. And one of the things I learned about people in power, they gonna end up on the winning side.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you got people in power who just outright racist, but you got people in power who's just a blank. It's like, is this the power? It's like, I've been in situations.
I want to maintain position.
Right.
Yeah. Very pragmatic. Whatever, go with what works, so I can stay where I'm at.
Right.
but we don't, due to our racist conditioning as black folks, we don't see it like that. We just assume that that everything's the same, and it's not. And I keep saying that when, as an individual who's been able to kind of move up social ladder or whatever we want to call it, I've been in those spaces and I see what's there, and it's like these people ain't that bright.
No,
They don't. It's not what people think. I mean, for some reason in our community, we think that all white people are rich, they're all extra smart, they're all dominant. Like there's some folks that are in positions that they probably shouldn't be in, but there's nobody else qualified to take their spot.
Right. Or the people in power likes leaving them there because
they're useful idiots.
They're useful idiots. And I've had white folks say that to me to my face.
Yeah.
Man, Sam, I know your boss is a dummy, but you cannot continue to give him grief. Right? Yeah. I can't cover. I mean, I got more respect for you because you don't talk. But when it comes down to it, I'm gonna take his side, right? Yeah. And it's like, okay, I could handle that, right? And so the thing is and make it so bad as black people, we can know a person is dumber than doornails, right? Mm-hmm. But we're still
give them the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
We still will.
And we can know that, we know they dumb doornails, but you still doing goofy stuff dealing with this dumber than doornails person that that will, if he ain't got nothing else, he got white privilege and will go at you.
Right.
When it's like, why are you messing with dude like that?
Right.
There's ways to go around dude. Let's go pat him on the head. No, you a good white man. And undermine him all day.
Right.
Shoot. It's like, but again, that means that we have to deal with that that trauma that feeds our emotional reaction.
Exactly. And that's the healing work.
Right.
And this is what I did a show on my podcast last week about being addicted to white. And I really think that we're addicted to the concept of whiteness. And we don't know anything outside of that. And since that's our standard in this society, we tend to decompress our own self-esteem and motivation to fit this white context where white is always right, and white's always going to be better. And once we break that psychologically, I think a lot of us are going to be better off than where we're at.
And a lot of us don't realize it. Right. Yeah, so it's not a good and bad. It's just that we don't realize it. But we think about it. If you're saturated by a system generation after generation, how you can go without understanding what it is. So it's not, a reason for people to beat up on each other and want to cuss us out and talk about, we think we better than other. It ain't about thinking I'm better or no better. I am good to me.
Right.
Right. And if that makes me feel better, seem to be better than somebody else, so be it.
Right.
And on that note,
we'll wrap it up for today. Another installment of the Healing Brothers podcast.
Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week.
Peace, everybody.